Hello, friends. Perhaps you have had this experience. You read the description of your astrology sign somewhere, maybe in a magazine, maybe on a website. Maybe a friend mentioned it at dinner, and instead of nodding along and feeling recognized, you found yourself thinking, that isn't really me at all. Maybe you were told that your sign is bold and outspoken, and you know yourself to be quiet and careful. Maybe your sign is supposed to be deeply emotional and sentimental, and you consider yourself practical, almost detached. There can be a strange little disappointment in that moment, as if you were handed a mirror and it showed someone else's face. And if this has happened to you more than once, you may have started to wonder whether astrology simply doesn't apply to you, or whether something else is going on beneath the surface. This feeling touches something quite personal. We often want to be seen and understood, and a system like astrology promises a kind of instant recognition, a shortcut to being known. So when that shortcut seems to miss the mark, it can feel oddly personal, almost like being misunderstood by an old friend. It can shape how you feel about the whole subject, whether you dismiss it entirely or whether you quietly keep wondering if there's a piece of the puzzle you haven't yet found. Today, I want to sit with that question gently, without trying to convince you that astrology is either perfectly true or entirely nonsense. Instead, I want to walk through the many reasons a person may not recognize themselves in their own sign, because there are more of these reasons than most horoscope columns ever mention, and understanding them can actually make your relationship with this subject richer, not thinner. Let us start with the most basic observation, which is that your sun sign, the one everyone asks about at parties, is only one placement among many in a much larger picture. In astrology, the moment of your birth is imagined as a kind of snapshot of the sky, with the sun in one constellation, yes, but also the moon somewhere else, and the rising point on the horizon somewhere else again, and each of the planets scattered through different signs and houses. Your sun sign describes, broadly, your core identity and your conscious will, the general direction you're always slowly growing toward. But it is not the whole chart, not by any means. It is a little like being handed one paragraph from a long biography and being asked to recognize the whole person from it. Some people happen to have their sun very strongly supported by other placements nearby, so the sun's traits shine through clearly and the horoscope description feels accurate. Other people have a sun that is, so to speak, quieter in the chart, tucked behind stronger placements elsewhere, so the generic description of their sign barely scratches the surface of who they actually are. If you have ever felt unlike your sign, this is often the very first thing worth remembering. You were never meant to be fully described by 1/12 of the picture. Now let us turn to the rising sign, sometimes called the ascendant, because this is one of the most common reasons people feel a mismatch. The rising sign is determined by the exact time and place of your birth, and it describes something like the doorway through which you meet the world, your outer manner, your first impression, the way strangers tend to read you before they know anything else about you. Many popular horoscope columns, especially the short daily kind, focus only on the sun sign because it's the simplest thing for a reader to know without their birth time. But your rising sign can be just as influential in how you come across, sometimes even more so in daily interactions. If your rising sign has a very different temperament from your sun sign, you may find that the sun sign description feels like a version of you that exists somewhere inside, in private, while the rising sign is the version most people actually meet. Someone with a warm, expressive sun sign but a reserved, private rising sign might come across as guarded and careful to nearly everyone they meet, even close friends, even though their sun describes a warmer inner nature underneath. This can create real confusion when a person reads about their sun sign and thinks, everyone says I'm supposed to be outgoing, and I don't feel outgoing at all. In many cases, they are outgoing, quietly, in a way that only shows itself once the rising sign's guardedness relaxes around people they trust. There is another layer to this, and it involves the moon sign, which many people never think to check at all. Where the sun describes your conscious identity and the rising sign describes your outer presentation, the moon is often associated with your emotional world, your instincts, the part of you that reacts before you've had time to think. Some traditions describe the moon as the self you become at home alone or in moments of stress, the self that isn't performing for anyone. If your moon sign has a very different emotional temperature from your sun sign, this can create the feeling that your sun sign description simply doesn't capture your inner life. A sun sign known for confidence and directness might sit alongside a moon sign known for sensitivity and a need for security, and the result is a person who appears bold on the outside, but who in private worries and second guesses far more than anyone would expect. When someone like this reads a horoscope built entirely around bold, confident sun sign traits, they may think, that's not me, I'm actually quite anxious underneath. And they would be right, and also, in a way, still be describing their sign correctly. It's simply that their emotional undercurrent belongs to a different part of the sky. Let us also talk about something more practical, which is the question of cusp dates, meaning the days at the very edge of one sign turning into the next. If you were born close to one of these boundary days, you may have grown up uncertain which sign you truly belong to, especially since the exact dates shift slightly from year to year depending on the calendar and the precise astronomical positions, not the neat round dates printed in most calendars and apps. Some people born on a cusp day feel a blend of two signs, carrying qualities from both, which can make any single description feel incomplete on its own. Others discover, once they check their actual birth chart rather than relying on a general date range, that they belong entirely to one sign or the other after all. And the mismatch they felt was simply the result of using an approximate birthday chart instead of the accurate one. This is a very ordinary human reason for feeling unlike your sign, and it has nothing mysterious about it at all. It is simply a matter of precision, the same way a doctor's diagnosis depends on an accurate reading rather than a rough guess. Now, here is a related and often overlooked piece, and it concerns the houses. In a full birth chart, the sky is divided into 12 sections called houses, each associated with a different area of life, such as home, work, relationships, or self-image. Your sun and your other planets each fall into one of these houses, and this placement changes how the sign's energy actually gets used in daily life. Two people can share the exact same sun sign, yet if that sun falls into a very public, career-oriented house for one person and a very private, home-centered house for the other, their lives will look and feel remarkably different from each other, even though the underlying sign is identical. One of them may become known publicly for the classic traits of their sign appearing in leadership roles or in the spotlight, while the other expresses the very same traits quietly at home with family, almost invisibly to the outside world. If you feel your sign doesn't match your visible personality, it may be worth considering that your sign's traits are simply being expressed in a part of your life that isn't very visible to others, or even fully visible to yourself, rather than being absent altogether. There is another side to this worth acknowledging honestly, which is that pop astrology, the kind found in short daily horoscopes and quick personality quizzes, tends to flatten each sign into a small set of exaggerated traits for the sake of simplicity and entertainment. This isn't a criticism so much as an observation about how mass media works. A short horoscope column has only a sentence or two to describe an entire sign, so it reaches for the most dramatic, most easily recognized version of that sign's supposed personality. Over years, these simplified traits repeat so often that they start to feel like established fact, even though the older traditions astrology draws from were often more layered, more conditional, more attentive to nuance. If you don't relate to your sign, it's worth asking whether you don't relate to the sign itself, or whether you don't relate to the cartoon version of the sign that pop culture has been repeating. Many people find that when they read a deeper, more traditional description of their sign's underlying themes, rather than the quick internet summary, they recognize far more of themselves than they expected. Let us turn now to something quieter and more personal, which is the role your own life experience plays in shaping who you've become. Astrology in most thoughtful traditions was never meant to override free will or personal history. A birth chart is often compared to a set of raw materials or potential tendencies rather than a fixed script you're forced to follow. Someone born with a chart that leans toward impulsiveness may have grown up in a family that strongly valued patience and self-control, and through years of practice and effort, they may have become one of the most careful, measured people you know. Their chart hasn't changed, but their expression of it has been shaped, gently or firmly, by upbringing, culture, choices, and effort. If this describes you, your sign may technically be accurate in its rawest form, while your lived personality has grown into something more complex, layered over that original tendency like sediment over stone. This is one of the more comforting explanations for feeling unlike your sign because it suggests you haven't been mislabeled at all. You have simply grown, and growth is something no static description could ever fully capture. Now here is a slightly different angle concerning the slower-moving planets that some traditions place great importance on, such as Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. These planets travel so slowly through the sky that entire generations of people are born while they sit in the same sign. This means that certain personality traits, sometimes attributed to broader trends, aren't really about your sun sign at all, but about the generation you happen to belong to. If you feel that your sign's traits described in an article are more about a generational mood than a personal one, that instinct might be accurate. The truly individual placements in a chart tend to be the faster-moving ones: the sun, the moon, the inner planets, and the rising sign. precisely because they change quickly enough to be different from one person to the next, even among people born only weeks apart. When a description leans heavily on the slower planets without saying so, it may end up describing millions of people equally, and millions of people equally described tend to feel, quite reasonably, that the description doesn't capture anything special about them individually. There is also a technical distinction worth mentioning gently without turning this into a lecture, and that is the difference between the tropical zodiac, which is what most Western astrology uses, and the sidereal zodiac used in some other traditions, including certain schools of Vedic astrology. These two systems calculate the boundaries of the signs differently, based on different reference points in the sky, which means a person's sign can genuinely differ depending on which system is used. Someone might be one sign according to the tropical calendar and an entirely different sign according to the sidereal one. If you've ever compared a Western horoscope to an Indian or Vedic one and felt confused by contradictory descriptions, this difference in systems is very likely the reason, not a flaw in either tradition, simply two different ways of mapping the same sky. Neither is universally agreed upon as more correct than the other, and many people quietly find that one system describes them more accurately than the other, which is a very reasonable thing to notice and follow rather than something to feel troubled by. Let us also consider the emotional weight we sometimes attach to identity itself, because this shapes how readily we accept or resist any label, astrological or otherwise. Some people resist identifying strongly with any category, whether it's their sign, their generation, their profession, or even their nationality, because they feel most comfortable seeing themselves as individuals first, resistant to any framework that feels like it's boxing them in. If this describes your temperament, it's worth asking honestly whether the mismatch you feel is really about astrology specifically, or whether it's a broader pattern of resisting categorization in general. This isn't a flaw, of course. Many rich, complex personalities feel this way, and it often comes from a healthy sense of individuality. But it's worth noticing, because it means the feeling of not relating to your sign might say as much about how you relate to labels in general as it says about the accuracy of the sign itself. And then there's the simple human factor of change over time. The person you were at 20 may feel quite unlike the person you are now, and both of those people were technically the same sign the whole time. Many traditions describe astrology as describing potential and tendency rather than a fixed, unchanging state, meaning your relationship to your own sign's traits can shift as you move through different chapters of your life. Someone whose sign is associated with steady, grounded practicality might have spent their 20s feeling restless and impulsive, only to settle into that grounded practicality much more visibly in their 30s or 40s, once life circumstances, responsibilities, and personal growth caught up with the underlying pattern. If you read your sign's description at one age and it didn't fit, it may be worth revisiting that same description years later, because the fit sometimes changes as you do, not because the sign was wrong, but because you were still becoming who you were meant to become. I think it's also worth mentioning gently that astrology was never meant to be the only mirror available to us. There are many systems people use to understand themselves: numerology, human design, personality typing, even simple reflection through journaling or conversation with people who know us well. If your astrology sign doesn't feel like an accurate reflection, it doesn't mean something is wrong with you, and it doesn't necessarily mean astrology itself is meaningless. It may simply mean that this particular mirror, out of many possible mirrors, isn't the one that best catches your light. Some people feel deeply recognized by their astrology chart and only mildly interested in numerology. Others feel the opposite, barely recognizing themselves in their sign but finding uncanny accuracy in their numerology profile or their human design type. This isn't a contradiction. It's simply a reminder that no single symbolic system was ever meant to capture the entirety of a human being, because human beings are wonderfully resistant to being fully captured by anything. If we gather all of this together, a clearer picture starts to form. Feeling unlike your astrology sign rarely means the whole system is false, and it rarely means something is wrong with you either. More often, it means the description you encountered was too simple for the fuller picture your birth chart actually contains, or it drew from a different placement than the one that most shapes your outward personality, or it leaned on generational traits rather than personal ones, or it used a different zodiac system than the one that resonates with you, or it simply hasn't caught up yet with the person you have grown into through years of living, choosing, and changing. Astrology at its best was never meant to hand you a finished portrait. It was meant to offer a set of gentle observations, an invitation to look more closely at yourself, not a verdict to accept without question. So here is a small suggestion if you're curious to explore this further. Rather than judging your relationship to astrology by your sun sign alone, you might look up your full birth chart using your exact birth time and location if you have access to it, and notice your rising sign and your moon sign alongside your sun. See which of the three feels most like the way you present yourself to strangers, which feels most like your emotional inner world, and which feels most like your deeper, quieter sense of direction. You may be surprised to find that the sign you always dismissed as inaccurate was simply describing a part of you that lives more privately than you realized, tucked behind the parts of your personality that meet the world first. As you go about your days now, you might notice something interesting if you pay a little attention. Perhaps there was a period in your life, after a big move, after a new relationship, after stepping into a different job or role, where you suddenly felt closer to your sign's traits than you ever had before, almost as if a dormant part of your chart woke up to match the shape of your new circumstances. Or perhaps the opposite happened, and a sign that once felt accurate began to feel distant as your life quieted down or changed direction. These shifts are worth noticing, not because they prove any particular theory, but because they reveal how alive and layered your relationship to yourself already is, astrology aside. Whatever conclusion you come to about your own sign, I hope you'll hold it lightly, the way you might hold any tool meant to help you understand yourself a little better, useful when it helps, and easy to set down when it doesn't. It's also worth remembering that astrology, whichever way you choose to use it, sits alongside many other influences on who you are, your family, your culture, your choices, your effort, and simply the particular unrepeatable shape of your own life story. No chart, no sign, no single symbolic system was ever meant to replace all of that or explain it away completely at most. It offers a companion perspective, one lens among several, something to hold up beside your own self-knowledge rather than instead of it. If this question of feeling unlike your sign interested you, you might also enjoy exploring how the rising sign specifically shapes first impressions, since that's often the missing piece behind so many of these mismatches, and a subject that deserves its own closer look sometime soon. That is all for today. I hope this was interesting for you. Please subscribe to the channel. I will be very glad to have you here.